Well, it's good to be here with you all today. My name is Chris from the Pond team, and I'm joined by Antonio from Coeus Collective and Charles from Sharpe. And we're here today to have an interview between Charles and Antonio for this Founder Speedrun Hackathon. We thought that we would bring on an exciting guest, Charles, who has an extensive background in legal, all in the context of Web3. And I just want to give a brief intro of Pond for those of you who may not be familiar. So Pond is an all-in-one launch platform for early stage crypto and AI startups. And what we do is we offer infrastructure support, go-to-market support, and community-powered financial boosts or community seeding or funding so that founders can focus on building, and Pond will help with the rest. And the purpose of this hackathon is to identify top teams in the space who will then move on to Pond markets and then get access to those financial boosts that they need in order to be set up for success and build their business. So I'll kick it over to Antonio to go over the rest.
Great. So it's a pleasure to be here. I have heard that the title of this is incorrect, so I am going to update that really quickly. All right, so we go to our LinkedIn. Just give me 1 second, everyone. This is the first time that we have ever live streamed, so we're very excited about that. I think, okay, we might have to, I'm not sure what's going on there. Yeah, okay. So Leon's going to get on that. Thank you, Leon. All right, so we're here today with Charles Slamowitz. Charles, thank you so much for being here. My name is Antonio. I'm co-founder and CEO of Coeus Collective. Coeus Collective is the home for entrepreneurship in New York City. We like to say that if you're an entrepreneur and you're in New York City, if you're a technologist, if you're a VC investor, start with Coeus Collective. We have events and media, we do podcasts, and now this is our first ever live stream, and we're really glad to be able to do this on our channels here on X, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So shout out to all of you in all of the different places where we're at right now. This is such a special opportunity, and Chris, we're so grateful for you and your team for bringing us together. And this is going to be something that's going to be an amazing 2 weeks. There are over 700 people registered for this hackathon. That's amazing. 700 competitors, all making sure that they are going to be able to competing for up to 50K in prizes. So that's what we have going on here. And these sessions are primarily meant to be a little bit of an ideation, a little bit of showcasing a different perspective from people who are leaders in the Web3 and AI worlds. So today, we're getting started with Charles Slamowitz. I consider Charles a dear friend. Charles was a part of the first hackathon that we did during New York Tech Week, the New York Minute Hackathon. And I'll leave it to him to introduce himself. So thank you kindly for being here, Charles. Tell us about yourself. And where are you right now? Because that background's beautiful.
I'm in Greece right now, and it's the summer edition, so I'm going to do this outside a little bit. But thanks for all for bringing me on for this special initial launch, I guess, of this podcast series, and also about the tech innovation system. And I love what Chris Pond are doing as well. I mean, it's so important right now to think about information from a collective standpoint about how could you really help somebody with a myriad of different tools. And we'll get into more about that, tools and legal. But my name's Charles Slamowitz. I'm managing partner at Slam Sharpe. I've counseled over 300 projects to date. I've been recognized. I sold a startup myself, actually, when I was 22, going into 23. And that really sparked my journey. It was a wearable ring with a camera that took selfies and goes to your cell phone. And it was called My Ring Technologies. And I realized there weren't a lot of lawyers that in emerging tech, especially, that worked with you. A lot of lawyers would charge you a lot of money, give you the maybe answer. And as a builder and as somebody who really wanted to make change, I realized you need an attorney to do that. Since then, I graduated as a top program at Stanford, Emory Law School. I worked at the Supreme Court of New York, and I ended up leaving Omnicom, where I had $3.5 billion under me, working with Google, TikTok, et cetera, to start my own business and my own law firm. Since then, again, over 300 companies. I focused a lot on crypto, and AI has just taken a massive swing since then. So happy to be here. Super passionate also about ensuring these type of hackathoners are guided in the right direction legally, and that legal shouldn't be a hurdle. In fact, legal should actually be something that you could work with and not worry about, telling legal or not to really be successful in this space.
Certainly agreed, Charles, that legal should not be a hurdle. I am not a practicing attorney, but I did graduate law school and passed the bar last year. And knowing that, I think that's led to us being able to connect in a great way. And I think, democratizing access to the benefits that can come out of having a great lawyer or understanding the legal system are so important, especially for technologists. Sometimes technologists may want their attorneys to get out of the way and just let them build, which is also something, but the guardrails are also necessary, and I think we're going to have to discuss that a bit today. I think I would love to start, Charles, by asking you, I think we're going to start with this question with everyone in this series. What is a fond hackathon memory that you have? It could be about the hackathon that we worked on together during New York Tech Week, or about a different one. What's a fond hackathon memory?
Of course, I have to say the one that we worked on together. I think it was just, it was during New York Tech Week, and there were thousands of events for people who don't know through A16Z. You know, I met Antonio, and this was more of a random thing for me. I had such a packed schedule, and I realized that just what Antonio was doing and about how he has an incubator, and that's such an important model. I went there, and just the fact that you're able to give advice to people, and then, you know, even months later at this point, and weeks later, you're getting LinkedIn messages, you're seeing people, and you're hearing about the impact that you made just by being a judge and just by giving your advice. I thought that was incredible. And, you know, early days, I'd say, like back in Emory Law School, I worked a lot with Georgia Tech. And I'd say that a fonder memory for me was that just seeing things happen right away, just being able to see, we had a random project called Scholar Dollar, where we were just helping people get scholarships, and just hanging around a lot of mentors, being able to hear their advice, and then watching an idea come from, you know, the ideation stage to actually creation, and hearing people take it seriously, like that was just so impactful to me. I remember that pretty vividly at Georgia Tech, where, you know, you have like one weekend together. I'm like, wow, feels like anything's possible, you know, back then.
And that's all it takes, Charles, honestly, with the startup movements. Like, it takes 24 hours to get an idea going, especially in the era of vibe coding. There's always just a little bit of time that is required. And then once that baseline time is in, what you work on can be sent all the way around the world. So it's honestly amazing, and hackathons provide the opportunity to do that. We're grateful to Pond for this opportunity, not only the opportunities for funding at the end of the hackathon, but even the guidance throughout this 2-week period. So I guess let's get started on some questions, because we want to advise the people who are participating in the hackathon here, while also thinking about what are some of the trends that are going on for people who are in this hackathon, but also just building in technology on our channels generally. Would love to ask you about, there's some automations that are going on in the legal world, right? And I think it's important for us to think about how these legal automations can support startup founders, but also how they can potentially move ourselves to the different world in which maybe a lot of this has some guardrails that are needed. So what are some legal automations that you think hackathon teams can implement, but also early stage builders generally?
Yeah, it's actually a very interesting question, and I think we talked about it a bit before this. And there are a few ways to go about it, but to give the general idea, I'd say first and foremost, beyond legal, you really need to think about different integrations applications, such as Cider, such as others, that you could compare other AIs together. I think one of the biggest issues right now is people are almost like, are you a Claude person? Are you Anthropic? And they're going to start working to one. You could be pretty agnostic right now and actually type something in and then compare it to a ton of different ones. So if you're going to ask a legal question and then somehow there's some sort of bias on DeepSeek, for instance, but then all of a sudden Anthropic is another answer, it'd be super nice. Again, Cider is just one example. And also be careful what you ask. You don't want to just give everything away, et cetera. But I'd say that type of automation flow is actually super helpful. Because if you're going to say, oh, should we give, you know, this co-founder X equity, but they want this type of phantom share, or they want, you know, some sort of vacation, as an example. If you type something in and then you go through one sort of silo, if you will, and you're like a big, you know, Anthropic person or Perplexity. I had met with the owner recently, and that comes to mind because they're doing agentic AI. But, you know, especially in the legal standpoint, not one AI model is necessarily correct. Like, the courts never said ChatGPT, whatever it's going to opine, is correct. So even though you may not, you know, have an attorney at hand, if you're going to look at the broader overview and say, okay, I see the majority of people think this way, hadn't thought about that legal issue, let me bring up to my lawyer. That's important. And then just delving slightly deeper, if you do have a legal question, and again, it's so important to get a lawyer on retainer or get something going early. And look, I've been a startup founder myself. I've avoided attorneys. I'll admit it. I think it's so, you know, you have an idea and you're like, they're just going to tell me, no, I don't have the money for this. I don't have the time for this. I completely get it. You have to find the right partner with you. But in the meantime, there are different integrations and uploads right now for me personally, I like Law Insider and DraftWise. And full disclosure, I was an early investor in DraftWise. They're valued now at 100 million. I was at about 16 mil in 2020. What they do is basically like a word integration where if you are looking at a contract or you're drafting a contract, a lot of people are using AI right now, you could compare it to prior contracts. And the best part is we live in such a wealth of information right now. The SEC filings on Edgar, so many law firms can't necessarily hide the contracts that they did before, especially if they're in court, which is a public forum. So if you download Law Insider, and I don't know how much it is a month, like $20 a month, or DraftWise is more geared towards attorneys. However, there are, some people, especially Antonio might want to use it, or other people like that. It could compare. So you're able to, like a spell book or like other AI, it could help redline for you. It could suggest clauses. And that is a game changer. Even as a hackathon founder, it could give you ideas that you may not have thought of. If you're clashing with a co-founder or clashing with a contractor, and then it says, oh, by the way, contractors' equity usually doesn't invest for this period, and that's the standard, overall, that could really help move things along, or vice versa. So I think that taking a note at those two things, number one is really think about as a team, taking a step back and don't just trust one AI platform, like really just don't. And if you have a comparison tool, even legal questions, I'd say that's phenomenal. And again, I'm just giving examples, but again, DraftWise, Law Insider, those are things that if you're able to integrate into your own AI, think of it like an agent, it's really going to help you succeed in my view and move quicker.
That's amazing, Charles. I mean, something that feels really interesting and important, I think, from the founder perspective here is understanding that you really want to work with a model that has memory. Does DraftWise or Law Insider, do they have memory? Could they understand what the business is about?
Yes and no. I'd say a lot of these don't on purpose. One of the biggest clashes we have right now in legal tech, there are a few, but I'd say predominantly, beyond the fact that it's so important, right, to store a lot of information, it's really the question about what could be stored and what can't be stored, especially when it comes to legal. So I think one of the biggest things is that ensuring that you may need to reprompt, you may need to remind the AI, even if it has some sort of data bank or et cetera. We moved RAG, we moved to other type of implementation processes. But yeah, those two I can't actually vouch that they do, but what they do have is a memory bank, or at least access to all the other legal precedents and all the other things that people do. So you kind of want to use that sparingly with that scope. But you also, I provided to someone recently the movie 50 First Dates by Adam Sandler. It's a little bit of an older one. But I'd say that if you think about different AIs, about how you sometimes, it's going to forget things out of nowhere. Even if it does have access to your data, it's not always 100%, especially if you're not getting the full premium, if you don't really know how to, in a way, manipulate or work with tokens. Sometimes you do need to have a prompt at hand, or you do need to have some sort of saved stuff to remind it and say, by the way, I'm doing XYZ business. I'm looking at this problem. It's not the end of the world to resubmit something, especially if you keep going and have kind of a chain workflow. You're able to store that information and then resubmit to the AI as you go. Yeah, very good question.
So training an AI is like watching 50 First Dates, or at least like going through 50 First Dates. That's very interesting because no, it really is illustrative actually, Charles, because it gets through that concept of understanding that this is an opportunity to get to know a little bit about yourself, and each query you give in teaches them a little bit about yourself, but they're not really going to know what's inside, right? And maybe there are some problems potentially for people that maybe give out too much information on the first date, or even give out too much information to their AI. But on a serious note, what I think is really well taken there is a note that memory sometimes is not the best for these. Maybe you want it to be fresh, especially in the legal context. You and I both know, going through law school, passing the bar, just how much information is needed to understand the law, how many precedents there are, the fact that there are so many different things, so many different types of courts. In Web3 and crypto specifically, there's even a lot of comparative law because the law is so different between the different countries. So that's a really interesting component. So understanding that, yeah, maybe memory is actually not the best from the legal perspective is really, really interesting.
Absolutely. And just along those lines, I know we have a lot of questions, but one of the most, fortuitous benefits that you're going to get for kind of toggling with the idea about not every question should actually have every single aspect of the memory is really thinking about trade secrets and IP protections. And that's something that if you actually have some sort of secret sauce, if you look right now at the talent wars that are going on, $100 million going to certain people to leave one place and go to somewhere else. If you actually withhold some of the information, especially when you're prompting, that could ultimately become a trade secret, which, you may need to speak to an attorney or other IP protections. But the fact of the matter is, if you reprompt an AI software or LLM agent, and you don't say everything and you don't provide your secret sauce, there's actually a much higher probability that whatever you're doing, that whatever makes your company distinct, whatever you hackathoners are doing, and that makes you different, you may not always want to share right away. And that's also a massive benefit that is going to start to emerge in our view in the next few years, if not the next couple of months, to make your project more valuable.
Amazing. Thank you, Charles. And all these questions are coming in, and these are awesome. We're going to get to them in a little bit. I just want to ask Charles, I want to ask you one more question that could be more general for everyone. Maybe you can just note one mistake that you think hackathon founders typically make, or early stage builders typically make at the earliest stages, right? Part of the beauty of a hackathon is that there should be no limitations. There should be no guardrails. However, sometimes, as we know, when people are coding things or when people are creating an idea generally, you go into a concept that I would like to call idea debt very frequently, where you're working on something, you don't really realize that there are a lot of issues that can happen with creating this idea, right? So maybe you can just let the people know of one common mistake you see of early stage builders, even specifically ones in this Pond Hackathon, ones that people in this Pond Hackathon should look out for.
Yeah, very good question. There are many mistakes, and I think as human beings, it's one of those things that if you did know what mistake it was, then most people would actually kind of address it more. But, thinking through that, I really came to a few conclusions. And I'd say that the biggest one for me was, especially you as a team, and especially when you're working at a hackathon, it's true. The ideas are so limitless, possibilities. You and your team really need to get together. And I'd recommend even in intervals, even every week. This is a shorter span, twice, but even I'd say every day if you really have the discipline. Think about what you're really trying to do. Think about what your purpose is and your roadmap is, because I think that the biggest problem, especially in legal, is that no one knows exactly what they're trying to do. Some do, but those are the ones that often go to succeed. I'm also going to give a resource soon, I think, or two resources that I think would help nail this down. But if you're able to think about really, okay, we're launching tokens as an example. Why are we launching tokens and what are we launching tokens for? That I think is something that, I'd call it a mistake. It's preemptive, because if you don't really think about that all the time, you're going to run into so many issues, even legally, because you're going to start doing things that maybe you're not even supposed to do. Especially when you start working with really intelligent people, you work with really good coders, engineers, they typically come up with a lot of different solutions. Sometimes they're not even solutions that you need. So I'd say that understanding it and then using that to your advantage. Again, not always sharing everything right away. I know that there are judges and everything else, but being very particular in what your secret sauce is and where you're trying to go. Like, why are you using tokens, et cetera? And the resources I want to provide. I'd say that I learned this a little bit more recently, but pretty obviously, you should go through the YC questionnaire. You should go through ETH Global questionnaire, other hackathon questionnaires, and obviously going through Coeus Collective and Pond, et cetera, because those are the things that are going to nail down, even regulatorily, about what are you really trying to do here. And then once you completely understand it, you have to recognize not every law applies to you. So just because there's a Genius Act coming out, a Takedown Act, other stuff, it may or may not apply. The big push, especially in crypto, was does Howie apply to us or not? And sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. And we found out more recently that a lot of it didn't, especially given a little bit more regulation, but it might in the future. So I'd say the biggest thing is that you really have to, you're going to be thrown with a million things. But you and your team really have to harp down and not be hard on each other either, but say, what are we really doing? What do we really want to do? And I think that will help guide you through a lot of mistakes, if anything.
That's amazing, Charles. I appreciate it so much. Shout out to the Howie test. Shout out to my blockchain law class, where I had to analyze that way too much for a 3-month period a year and a half ago. But it's amazing to hear. And I think that now we should start getting into some of the questions from the audience, and there's so many of them, so thank you so much, guys. Young Speaker, shout out Young Speaker, had this question. This is a very functional question, because Charles, someone like you is not going to be around for everyone all the time. So Young Speaker is asking, how frequently should you be in touch with your attorney?
Super good question. Again, it's going to vary. But I'd say that for me, one of the things that drove me to leave this really cushy job and, being able to work with all these things and become in a way, startup founder again for my law firm, while we were building, was the idea that, you're going to make, in my view, hundreds of decisions in a company, and some of them do require legal. So it's not really a recipe for all fits. However, to have a lawyer on call or standby is super, super important. You know, I used to get calls at 3 a.m. about like tokenizing real estate back in the day in Tulum or other places. But I'd say access is more important than frequency. And knowing, especially if you could contact your lawyer at 3 a.m, that's great. Sometimes it might be impossible and you're going to have to talk again early business day, but knowing that your lawyer is actually going to take it seriously. One of the bigger hurdles, especially as a hackathon participant and an early stage person, even if you get 5 million in funding, 10 million in funding, sometimes these attorneys, we deal with projects that are worth 500 million or more. We're doing legislation that could impact multi-billion-dollar companies and franchises. So sometimes it's still hard to get access to those attorneys, but make sure that you do. Make sure that somebody has some legal knowledge. Also, obviously, implement AI the best you can. Frequency, I would say in the beginning, you would want to meet with them at least once, twice a week if possible, or bi-weekly. Some lawyers will push you to do that. But having a regular check-in is super important because things are going to arise that either you or your lawyer may not know are an issue because you're kind of working on the opposite sides of the brain of the startup.
Understood. So noting that, the lawyer could hypothetically be the guidepost for the company, right? That role is, the lawyers had that role for a long time. However, there are new legal AI tools like Harvey, for example. And there's this question from Solve Labs about the presence or whether, and I've never thought of this concept, so honestly, thank you kindly for this question. The presence of whether there could be insurance for the use of AI in regulated industries, such as the law, right? So, for example, could one insure against the use of Harvey by a law firm, just in case Harvey is, providing some bad advice or something like that? Or are these risks falling outside of existing cyber insurance, tech errors, and emissions? This one's really interesting.
Yeah, very good question. It's something we've grappled with for a little bit. I'd say that the biggest thing is you really have to look at the cybersecurity industry as almost a guidepost and thinking about what are they insuring and how could you get this type of insurance? Because it's an evolving industry. I'd say that there are also new creative ways, especially within the age of poly market, to kind of bet against certain things. But at the end of the day, it's something, and Jeff Bezos actually said it quite well. Was the founder of Amazon. But the biggest thing, there were two types of decisions essentially that he looks at. And I think one is this decision that you actually could go back to. So if you have a legal question and it's like, okay, we're going to do X, Y, Z, we're going to change the terms in this way, obviously subject to change. We could talk to our lawyer a little bit later. We could implement Harvey and we could do something, utilizing these new AI agents. But is it something else? Is it, beyond core filings? Is it something that I'm going to actually send a contract to somebody? They're going to sign it before anyone looks it over. We're going to get it back. Is that something that we actually could revert from? And I'd kind of change those two buckets and really think about it that way. Think about, in the fast-paced decision-making process about, could we use AI for these things? Your lawyer says yes or no. I mean, that's between you guys. But also knowing that there are decisions that are pretty permanent just in terms of shaping the company. And I'd kind of change those two. And in terms of insurance, I mean, I don't know if you guys already chose a project. That's an interesting project, a little bit complex, but they're still building. I've seen some implementations of it, but it's really getting to know the insurer and having a good relationship and seeing what you could actually get because it's more of an unprecedented field. And lawyers and insurance don't typically like that.
Well, this is really, really fascinating. I mean, this showcases, I think, the global nature of what's going on here and how there are just so many open questions for lawyers to answer, but also open questions that are very simply just meant to be figured out by those who are building themselves, right? I'm sure, Solve Labs, that this is a question that the Harvey team is keenly aware of. This is maybe actually a question that the Harvey team would seek to profit off themselves by providing such insurance, kind of like, unfortunately, I guess how an airline would do it or something like that. And I think that there's something really interesting about whether insurance has a place in the society that takes on so much risk. However, that's a conversation for
just to earmark. Just to earmark too. Silicon Valley, I happen to know through H0 other places are grappling with that concept as well. That aside.
So and Charles, I could already tell we could have done 3 hours with this group. We could definitely be chatting for way longer. We have a few more minutes here. So with this being said, there's so many people building in software that have a lot of user data, and this question is from Francisco. So thank you, Francisco. So Francisco asks, how does he utilize his user data without them running away? Because he has obviously the need, especially with the GDPR regulations, right? to have people be aware of how much data they're sharing with him. But I guess Francisco's asking if you have any suggestions of whether there are methods to maybe get people to share their data without, this is going to be a really question. This is going to be a really important question. OpenAI is going to create their product, right? I personally think that the OpenAI product potentially is going to be a hardware product that people carry with you, who then is going to read, who's going to listen. I'm using the word who for an AI, who's going to listen to all of your conversations and be able to have your own knowledge base, and that's going to function with everything that happens with yourself in the future. So this is definitely a really, really important question. I think they're going to change the game with that device, whatever it is. But yes, let's talk a little bit about user data protections.
Right. In many ways, my view is that we did lose, as I guess humans and more sovereign individuals, we did lose a lot of the war on data. I think we've just reached a point where we opt into so many different things. Most of these companies, including financial institutions, often know more about your decision making than you do. So it's one of those situations where you really need to think about, especially from the startup vantage point, what value are you providing to this person giving up the data? Also, a lot of people care less about the data than you might realize, which I think is an issue, but I think it's just a reality. There are incentives. I think these aren't too well known. These are more, I guess, experimental, but the idea of data co-ops are interesting, and also the idea of data escrow are actually emerging through BlackRock and other places. So data escrow is an example. You want to ensure that the fidelity of your data and the protection of your data are quite high. You could actually start borrowing money against your data. And this is happening at a multi-billion-dollar level through top institutions. So when I was at Omnicom and we did a lot of advertising law, we worked with AT&T, New York Times, even TikTok, FedEx, and we had to deal with okay, where's the data being stored? How's it being stored? And how do we get users or enterprise companies or contractors to opt in? Sometimes it could be through a data co-op where it's like, if you share your data, we're actually going to give you more data from other people. But at the same time, if you just kind of bury it in the terms, I hate to say, but most people are just going to opt in anyway. If they're my internet attorney, professor, it's been a while since I was in law school, but my internet professor actually said something quite profound, which was, I'm an internet law professor. He went to the top institutions, he taught at them, and he said, I barely read the terms of service. If there's some sort of app you have on the App Store that you really want, are you going to scroll through the whole Apple terms about your data? Where's it going? What? Are you going to map out a whole chart like Charlie from It's Always Sunny to try to figure out what's going on? And then maybe they'll say no, probably not. So if I were you, especially, I'd focus really on the value add. And if someone is like, oh man, you have to give up data, etc. Okay, but the value is so high. And then obviously meet your customers and, and consumers or B2B as you go.
Amazing. Yeah, it's so important. I mean, I guess what I thought of immediately is, perhaps now there's definitely the concept of being able to take the TOS, copy the whole thing, put it into an AI, and ask it, whatever it thinks would be, if there's anything problematic here or what's really going on here. There's been some recent terms of service change that people have caught. For example, in CapCut, that's been a big one. That CapCut has some access now as a creative, somebody who runs a creative company here. That's something that I think we should be keenly aware of. CapCut now having access to everything that's created on the platform, not just the stuff that's published. So yeah, stay tuned for that. I think that's going to be really interesting. That's more of the democratization of information that's coming from AI generally, and the ability to analyze large swaths of text very quickly. All right, I think we're going to finish with one final question, Charles, if that's okay with you, even though we're getting to time.
Of course.
All right, cool. So this is from William 2023. Thank you, William. For an early stage startup with a limited budget, I like this one because this is now all encompassing of everything. What are the top 5 legal or compliance areas where the company should invest resources, even if it means a lot of upfront costs, to avoid lawsuits? I like even if it means a lot of upfront costs. Sometimes that's necessary. You got to make investments.
Yeah, I think you're actually approaching the question from the right way. And I like how you're kind of prompting it almost like an AI. I do the same, where I ask for so many different answers. 5's a lot. We are running out of time, but I do want to kind of hone in on the number one resource in my view is the attorney. And I think, even people that don't have a lot of funds or finances, you really do want to be able to get an attorney on your team. Maybe you could kind of get them or persuade them by giving them some sort of equity, showing them your financing, understand. A lot of attorneys are actually good in this space who understand how startups work, may be able to kind of work with you on that. Because you're right, what you really want to do is, again, you want to create the roadmap. And I'd say that one of the bigger resources that you want to invest in, even if you don't have a lot of money at the time, is some sort of opinion letter, a guidepost, a memo from an attorney themselves. Opinion letters do cost more. Sometimes the attorney, as we were talking about insurance, if they give you some sort of legal opinion and it's not correct, that could be an issue. However, our firm does that. I do that quite often because I see the value in that. So I'd say that, one is going to equal 5 in my view. That if you get that sort of internal memo, if you get that sort of opinion letter, you're going to be able to use that also to raise financing. The attorneys typically know a lot of venture capital. The attorneys also know a lot of regulators if they're good. So I think that letter and that kind of guidance is going to help you phenomenally, especially because if you think about early days crypto, there were certain projects that actually took opinion letters from Perkins Coie, a different firm, like a sister firm, and they basically said, we think that this is not a Howey test violation, and because of that, the appeals court says, okay, because you guys didn't know better, and because this firm is very reputable and good, we're not going to hold you accountable because of this letter. So I'd say that resource is so understated, because then we could go into IP, talk about trade secrets, we could go into data collection, we could go into everything else. But in my view, it really starts with the attorney. If you're going to start going on random websites and paying for random things, I can't necessarily guide you there. I think it is obviously important to compare AI. But, I hope one day lawyers will be, completely replaced for a couple of reasons. I don't just do law, but at the same time, I think it's super necessary. I think you still need that letter, and you can't get one with AI. You can't get AI to say, okay, this contract is good, and then you can't go to court and say, well, Your Honor, AI said that this contract is good, so it is. You actually need a law firm or a lawyer to take accountability and responsibility. And I could leave you with that. I mean, I can't really name prices per se, but I could tell you that it's a lot more affordable than you think. Even the price of 3 hours for an attorney, you could often get someone to audit it and then tell you where you might be lacking. And I would really push to kind of get that memo or letter, because it's going to open up so many doors beyond your compliance, but funding and direction for your companies.
Charles, that was a wonderful answer. On Coeus Collective, exactly what we like to do is to provide actionable advice, like true actionable advice, things that people can do, right? Get the opinion letter, not just saying random fluff about the legal industry, but getting the opinion letter. Charles, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for being here today. If you have anybody you'd like to plug on the way out, where can people find you and learn more and connect with you moving forward?
Yeah, appreciate you having me, and also obviously look at Coeus Collective even deeper. We are actionable, so I think my mission is to help startup founders, emerging tech, to actually take action and not be told maybe, not hold up, not have those legal hurdles. You can find me at slam_legal. Email me directly at charles@slamsharpe.com, and we'll be in touch. This podcast and this video conference will be there. But please don't be ashamed, don't be embarrassed to ask any legal question, because I think it's important. While we can't always answer legal advice, I'd kind of also just direct you to really think about when you are doing these action steps, what attorney are you working with? If not me, really ask the attorney, what have you done before and what's similar? And I think that you'll all be guided in the right direction. Best of luck on all your projects, and congratulations for taking this step and really trying with the hackathon. I think that speaks wonders.
All right. Thank you kindly, Charles. Always appreciate you, brother. We'll be in touch, and we hope to see you all for the next one of these, which will be on Thursday at the same exact time, 1 p.m. Eastern. That'll be with Josh Koutros, founding engineer, Pensar AI, a VC-backed AI cybersecurity startup based here in New York City. Josh is amazing. It's going to have a very different tone than this one. This one was on the legal side. That'll be more on the engineer side. So we're super stoked for that as well. Thank you, Pond, for this opportunity. Thank you to our sponsors, Google Cloud, the Ethereum Foundation, and 11 Labs, and we look forward to seeing all of you there. Good luck with the first few days of building, guys. You got this. Talk soon.
Thanks. You got it.
Bye.